All right. Hello, everybody. Happy Thursday, January 18th, and welcome to our first mock interview of 2024. It is the 85th episode of our mock interview series that we've started since the beginning of the pandemic, which has already been 4 years. Just crazy to think about. In this mock interview and in all of our mock interview series, we help job seekers such as yourself get acclimated and understand what is expected in the interview process. And so to help us, as always, is Corey Hiramoto, who have been doing this with for 4 years now. He is the founder of careershakers.com. He is a recruiter and a career coach, and he helps people transition careers and find jobs they love. And with him today is Mike. Mike is an engineering program manager, engineering leader. And this will go the way that it always goes. Corey will ask the questions, Mike will provide answers, and then Corey will provide feedback. And all of you who are watching now and later can ask your own questions as well. So without further ado, Corey, over to you.
Thank you, Albert, and thank you everyone for tuning in for the first inaugural mock interview series. And we are still looking for volunteers. We do these weekly. And so if anyone is kind of feeling stuck in their interview process, or you're feeling like you're getting lots of interviews but no offers, please do contact us. We'd love to have you volunteer. And today we're going to be practicing a role for Northrop Grumman. Grumman, I think that's how you pronounce it. It's a manufacturing engineering manager role. So I do believe this is a actual like a team management role. So we'll have some questions related to that. I'm going to put the job description link in the Zoom chat if anyone wants to follow along there. And before we dive in, I always like to give our brave volunteer first of all a huge round of applause, because this is not easy to put yourself out there in front of a live audience, especially for some constructive feedback and criticism. So huge shout out to Mike. Thank you so much. And please, everyone in the community, also give him a round of applause as well. And I would love to give him a short platform just to introduce himself in like a non-interview setting, talk to the audience about what kind of jobs he's looking for, where, what industries. And then if anyone who's watching this or watching the recording later is really impressed by Mike's background, you can always contact us to get in touch with him if you have a potential job opportunity for him. So Mike, why don't you take the floor for a minute or two?
This is the kind of summary that they use for the actual interview. So let me start with saying I started my career a long time ago in the NPD, new product development, designing electromechanical systems for the semiconductor in like CMP, chemical mechanical parameterization, and wafer inspection. Then I transitioned to life sciences at Thermo Fisher, designing electromechanical systems, but I did more of NPI when I became a technical project manager, still an individual contributor. And that's where I got exposed to more manufacturing activities, like full technical documentation, setting up workstations, setting up supply chain, working on cost reduction projects, applying methodologies like Six Sigma, DFX, design for manufacturability and assembly, working on changing processes to kind of come up with better kind of efficiency and less waste. Then I started my own company for a short time. Didn't work very well, so I had to go back to the workforce at Mia Soleil. Mia Soleil is a solar panel factory automation. So I was responsible for all the back-end capital equipment. So I designed, commission, and installed solar panels that will take the thin film solar sheets and convert them into solar panels where our customers can use. And in the last 4 or so years, I've been working on the semiconductor, designing electromechanical systems, and working on strategic projects like in Industry 4.0 or MBD or model-based definition, and design, in addition to designing fixtures and cost reduction projects that allowed me to kind of reduce cost and increase efficiency. And here I am applying for this position at this large company, and I really appreciate the opportunity and looking forward to joining your company.
And so what specific job titles are you looking for, and what locations?
I am definitely looking for a job in the tech industry, Manufacturing engineering is probably the perfect kind of fit, but I also fit in the engineering management in general. Supply chain or strategic projects also is another option, but I'd like to kind of stay in the manufacturing engineering or engineering arena because this is what I do the best.
Excellent. So if anyone knows anyone or has these postings, please reach out to Mike.
Absolutely. Really appreciate it here.
Okay, so let's dive on into the mock interview session. For those of you watching for the first time, how it typically works is we just go one question at a time. So I've taken his resume as well as the job description, and I create customized questions every single week. And we'll do one question at a time. So I'll ask a question, and then Mike will answer it as if it's a real interview, meaning I usually don't give any hints unless you get absolutely stuck, because we want this to be as close to the real deal as possible. But then at the end of each answer, then I'll give feedback on things that went well, so that if you're watching at home, you can take all those same elements and incorporate into your answers. And then we'll also go over some potential areas of improvement.
Absolutely.
Now, I've created some questions, but you as the audience, you also get to participate. So use the chat function wherever you're watching from. And then if you have any questions that you want me to ask, or if you have questions for me, feel free to put those in the chat. And that way we get all of your answers ready for you as well.
Right.
Mike, ready to get started?
Yes, sir. Go for it.
Let's do it. Let's start with a nice warm-up question. You know, Mike, we've got a lot of candidates that are applying for our role. So why should we hire you out of everybody else?
Well, based on the very first interview that I had with the hiring manager, I understood that this job primarily is looking for someone with a background in manufacturing engineering. And I've done a lot of this over the years. And I've been very successful in uh, transitioning electromechanical systems to high volume, including all these kind of cost reduction activities that you are asking for. So I'm very versed in the methodologies like Six Sigma, DFX, Design for Excellence, like manufacturability, assembly, and serviceability, and so on and so forth. I also have a lot of experience in managing large teams of engineers that will help me coordinate these kind of efforts and make sure that we can work on multiple projects at the same time. I also have the background in designing fixtures and equipment to help the company reduce the cost in the long run. So this is more like a mindset, and I'm very experienced in it. And I think I can probably hit the kind of the ground running, and I'm ready to start as soon as I get the offer.
Great. Cool. So I actually really like Mike's answer for multiple reasons. Number one, I think it's a very good baseline. It's a good starting point. Also, this is the most common version of way that people typically answer this question, right? So if
Oh,
for those of you watching at home, even if you're not applying for a manufacturing engineer role, you can still take some of these things and incorporate that into your answer, right? So whenever someone asks you, why should we hire you? They're basically asking, why should we hire you out of every single person that's also applying for this role, who also meets the qualifications for this role?
mm.
Now, the normal way that people answer this is just like how Mike did it. There's nothing wrong with it. But how Mike answered it is basically saying, oh, you should hire me because I meet all the qualifications for the role and I've done those things, right? That was Mike's answer.
Right.
Now, in a non-competitive job market, that answer is probably great. But in a super competitive job market like now, especially as companies have gone more global, some companies are hiring fully remote. This role is not, this one's in person. But in a super competitive job market, it's got to be, hey, I checked the boxes, right? I've done the things that you need to have people have done for you. But I've also done these things in an amazing way, or I've achieved amazing results. Let me tell you about some of those results, right? So what I want to challenge you to do now, Mike, is everything you've listed checks the box for me, right? Like, oh yeah, I needed someone who's got manufacturing process experience. Oh, I need someone who's managed large teams. Cool. Check, 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 check. But now let's elevate the answer one more time. So in each of those, just as a quick exercise, right? Spitball right now. For each of those things you've shared, can you give me like a super short 10 second example of something you did that's super amazing related to those things. So let's start with the first thing. You said like, look, I've got like 20 something years of manufacturer engineering experience. What would you say is like something super amazing that you've done that you feel like not a lot of people can replicate?
Well, I can probably answer a question that can be an example for multiple of these kind of issues. I managed like a team of 12 engineers in a cost reduction project for my last job. And the main target was to reduce the cost a minimum of 20%. It was acceptable to kind of do that over different phases, but we came up with a long list. And by the time we performed these kind of activities, we were able to achieve close to like 25 to 30% with about 10% more as we continue with that list. So I was able to kind of successfully meet the kind of cost reduction at the same time successfully come up with the list that we can pursue over a phased period of time.
And what was that time frame in which you got that 30%
We were
reduction?
supposed we were like every 6 months we need to kind of come up with a new plan for the more saving. So in the first 6 months we were able to kind of save 25%, and the following 6 months we were supposed to kind of do more. And I think we were I didn't have the chance to do it, but I think we were planning to kind of get to that point with another 5 to 10%.
Love it, right? So right off the bat, you could say, why should we hire you out of everybody else? Well, as you can see from my resume, I talked to the hiring manager. I got a good sense of the responsibilities. You're looking for somebody with robust manufacturing engineering experience. In my last company, I was actually able to exceed my cost reduction target. They wanted to save 20%. In the first 6 months, we were actually able to save 25. Then over the next 6 months, I also created a additional list of cost saving activities, such as blah, blah, blah engineering talk, which I don't understand, such as blah, 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 right? And then through that, we were actually able to continuously increase our cost reduction savings over time, right? Boom. Great.
So
Now,
the
the
point
second thing
here,
you,
so the
I'm
point
sorry?
here is basically come up with examples of every single item or skill that you're.
Very, very short examples, right? It's not like the whole situation, task, action, result. It's a very, very short example that demonstrates or shows why you are the best at something, right? Now, same thing, we're not going to do it because we'll spare the audience. But the next thing would be, okay, when you say you've managed large teams, cool, check the box, right? Love it. But you should say, I have experience managing team sizes from 8 all the way to whatever, right? The largest team I've managed is blah blah blah, maybe spanning multiple different countries or different regions, or I've also had to manage both, I don't know, union, non-union, whatever, right? Like something a little bit complicated that makes me go, oh yeah, okay, he's a really good manager, right? Because you need to find a way to make me believe that you are a really good manager without just saying I'm a good manager. Does that make sense? Right? Because right now you said I've got experience managing large teams. Cool. But are you a good manager? Are you an average manager? Or are you a bad manager? I don't know. Right. But if you can give me like a very short example, or you talk about your scope of work or something, right? You can say, yeah, and I've got team management experience, used to manage teams from 8 all the way up to 25 as my largest, both international and national, union, non-union. I even had a few underperformers in a team that I've inherited once. And I was actually able to win an award for my team for the highest performing blah, blah, blah operations, something, something. I don't know. Right. Like super short example where I go, oh, wow, Mike's a very good team manager, right?
What's
So
a
all this
what's a
together so
good
far is only like
duration?
30. I'm sorry.
What's the good duration for these kind of questions? You mentioned 10 seconds, but that's like a very short. Or is there like
Yeah,
a
yeah, yeah,
reasonable duration
yeah.
for?
Like yeah, I would say like 10 to 15 seconds. 10 to 15 seconds.
Okay.
Yeah. And in Mike's case, he's already talked to the hiring manager, so this is like he's got some insider info on what the hiring manager really wants, and so he's done is, which is very good. Everyone can learn from Mike. You take what the hiring manager has told you as the most critical parts of the role, and then that becomes your elevator pitch, right? You don't talk about anything else, even if it's on the job description. Whatever the hiring manager tells you is their focus, that's what you need to be pitching, and then you need to show that you are the best at that. And so when it's like, tell me about yourself, why should I hire you? Walk me through your resume. You want these super short but very powerful 10-second examples that make them go, oh, wow, I'm so glad that I'm talking to Mike. Like, I'm super excited about this interview now. Because if you're just like, check the box, check the box, check the box, they're going to be like, okay, all right. But you need them to go, wow. Mike's great.
That makes a lot of sense, Corey. Thank you.
Yeah. And then someone is asking, am I not the pretend hiring manager? So when I'm asking the question, I am the pretend hiring manager. But after Mike gives an answer, I'm going to give feedback as like a coach in a sense. So I'll be like jumping back and forth between both roles. Will structuring the answer in 3 to 5 sentences be enough? So for like a tell me about yourself, why should I hire you? You want your answer to be somewhere between like a minute to like 2 minutes. All the other styles of questions, you want like 3 to 5 minutes. But this one should be a little bit more concise. Now, I don't know if 3 to 5 sentences could be enough. You may need a little bit more, but ideally you want to be in that minute to 2 minute time frame. All right, cool. I love the audience participation this week. So now actually someone actually predicted, I think, my first question, which was going to be, Mike, this is a team management role. You're going to have a team of 10. Let's pick 10. There's going to be 10 people reporting to you. So can you describe to me your management and leadership style?
Sure. My management style is actually collaborative. I tend to kind of work with my engineers. I am a hands-on manager. In one instance, I worked with an engineer who was perceived to be an underperformer. He is a very highly introvert, so he was very kind of shy. He does not participate. He does not volunteer his time. But everybody else thinks that he's an underperformer. Until I found out he's a very intelligent person, I had to kind of work with him, give him the support and the encouragement. I assigned him to a couple of really strategic kind of projects, and I was able to get a lot out of him to the point that people recognized him as a very talented engineer, to the point that actually other people started to kind of approach him and ask him for help when they realized that he's a very talented person. So it's good to kind of be a you know, in board with the engineers, connect with them, understand them, and see where they're coming from, and help them get to where they want to be so they can perform better. So that's one example, and I hope that kind of answers your question.
Great. So the thing that Mike did really good here is he threw in a very powerful example. And the most powerful example you can give as a manager, in my opinion, is when you are able to turn around a low performer into a high performer, right? Because I mean, anyone can be a good manager if your team is already good before you get there, right? But being able to take an underperforming team and turn it around, that's the most powerful example. And then also Mike gave a very good, he gave social proof of it, right? Which was he got so good that other people started to ask for technical help. And this is also a very good example for those of you who are applying for like this combination of technical and soft skills roles, because it shows that Mike also has the technical capabilities. He's not just a people manager, because ideally companies want to hire someone who has both, right? Someone who's good at managing people, but also understands what is actually happening on a technical basis. And the only way that Mike could have done that is if he also understands the technical, and he didn't have to say that, right? He didn't say, oh, my leadership style is to like know what exactly what's going on. He just said, no, I also like to get hands-on, and I was able to turn this engineer around from a technical perspective. So it's a very good example. Now, the only other thing to add is if your company, and this is not for Mike because Mike's answer was fine, for other people, if you are interviewing for a leadership or manager role, look at the company website and make sure that whatever you describe your leadership style to be, it matches the leadership style or the values of the company. So I looked at Northrop Grumman. Luckily for you, Mike, they don't have anything posted about. Yeah, so that's why your answer is great, because it doesn't need to be tailored for Northrop Grumman. But for those of you who are applying for specific companies, do check their missions, their values, and their leadership principles, and make sure you use those in your answer, even if that's not actually your leadership style.
Got it.
Great work. Okay, here we go. Next question. Mike, can you tell me about a time where you had to use data in order to make a really good decision?
Sure, that's a very good question. One of the very first tasks I was asked to do when I joined my last job at LAM is to come up with a kind of a cost reduction plan over the following 2, 3, 4 quarters. And the very first thing that I had to do is come up with this kind of list of kind of changes. At the same time, we had to kind of justify when we need kind of spend time and money on doing these things. So I had to kind of have my team work on time studies to kind of measure certain activities so we can identify where the waste is, where the non-value added activities are, so we can justify spending the money or designing new fixtures or coming up with new designs or changing the processes so we can improve those activities. So over the following 2 quarters, we were working on focusing on 1 or 2 items so we can implement these kind of cost reduction activities. And within the first 3 quarters, we were able to kind of come up with this 25, 20 to 25% cost reduction. I'm not sure if that was enough, but was that too short or too long?
Okay, so this is a behavioral style question.
Yeah.
For those of you who are following or aren't aware, behavioral style question is anything that starts with "give me an example of" or "tell me about a time where." And the typical way to answer those is to follow the STAR method. There's also the CAR method, and then there's one new acronym that came out, but that's like situation, task, action, result. So Mike followed situation, task, action, result. Ideally, you want your answer to be somewhere between the 3 to 5 minute range.
Hmm.
So Mike was asking, is his answer too short? I would say yes, it's a little too short. Why does it matter to be too short? You may be thinking, well, shorter is better because you're more succinct. Now, it depends on how you tell the story, but generally, you want your story to be at least be 3 minutes because you want to give enough context to demonstrate the skills that you have, right? And so in this case, the skill that I'm looking to find is data analysis, comfort with data, presentation skills, critical thinking, identifying root causes of issues, etc. So in how Mike has told the story so far, I don't think I have enough context that demonstrates either of those skills quite yet, right? Your result is strong. Your result is you achieve 25% cost reduction. But how do I know how you got there, how you made the right decisions? I'm sure you had to choose maybe between like doing this or doing this. Like, how did you know this was better than this one at the time? Right? Like, give me that sense that number one, you're good with data. So you have to walk me through what data sources were you pulling from? How did you analyze the data? Did you do certain charts? Did you do certain statistical methods? Did you have to utilize certain systems? Right? You mentioned you're Sigma 6 certified, right? Like, so walk me through how you did those things. And then, of course, you should also give me some of the business context too, right? So walk me through like maybe why you decided to do this versus this, which led to 25% cost reduction.
Yeah, sometimes I'm afraid I'm gonna like indulge too much into details. But I can mention, for example, we had to kind of design our own design of experiment, so we can collect certain data on multiple areas that we found through methodologies like value stream mapping. We did the time studies, and time studies showed us areas of concern that we have to focus on, and we did more time studies to kind of justify those areas, and collaborating with other teams who can help us identify these technical issues with these kind of areas. We were able to kind of target these areas, and through data, we justify spending the money to design new equipment and new fixtures so we can save money that way. And another thing I can add is we had to kind of get help from other teams to help us achieve identify certain areas that needs to be improved.
Such as?
Oh, like for example, one area of design was the cooling system that was having technical issues, and we came up with few suggestions, and we approached the design engineering team who helped us identify these areas, and we provide them with a recommendation that they took in, and they planned it to be done for the next iteration of the design.
Great, great. Now, the other thing that you would want to add to this is a little bit of the, you can call it like root cause analysis. So you mentioned how you also did some time studies and you also did some experiments. So that's a great opportunity for you to actually show me like, okay, what were some of your hypotheses? What were some of the initial problems you had noticed when you joined this new company? maybe there were some immediate inefficiencies that you hypothesized were occurring, and then maybe you hypothesized certain solutions would work, right? And then you had to test those, pull the data, validate X, Y, and Z, right? That's the other context that you want to add kind of before that, because that shows your business acumen, that shows your technical strength, as an engineer, not just as a manager, right?
Got it. Yeah, actually, that makes a lot of sense. So I probably need to kind of organize my kind of answer in multiple ways.
Yeah, yeah.
Got it.
But you have all of the core components, right? We're just now adding a little bit of the important details that enhance the answer, that show your skill set a little bit better.
Absolutely.
Cool. Great job so far. And again, if anyone in the chat has questions for Mike or me, fire away. Okay. All right, let's stick on the technical side for now. So, Mike, based on your experience, what would you say are some of the common roadblocks our team would encounter in deployment of operating systems?
Well, a lot of times design engineers are usually not on board with design changes, especially if they feel that they made a mistake. And the example that I just mentioned about the cooling system design flaw, it wasn't acceptable at the beginning to accept that they made a mistake. So I had to work with the engineers and their managers to justify why we're having problems with these kind of issues with the cooling system. Again, this is a quad system for the chamber, and it's a very expensive and very complicated system. And we had to start with collecting data on where the flaws are, the balance between all the four channels, the areas of delay, and the difference between the balance, which is the difference between the different channels. And I had to kind of start by collecting data and sharing this data with the engineers and the managers. And that's when they started being more collaborative with us. So we had to kind of come up to the agreement that there is a problem that we need to solve. We implemented methodologies like 8D for problem solving, and we identified possible corrective actions. And in order for us to be able to meet certain dates, I had to kind of segment those into phases, phase 1 and 2 and 4 phases, basically to make it more sprint of changes rather than big changes all at the same time. So we had to kind of change the material first, come up with a plan to kind of do the design for the plumbing, and then changing the valves to come up with a better control on the floor channels. This way, we achieved the bare minimum at the beginning to solve the critical problems and the defects in the system. Then the cost reduction came next, and we're planning for more changes as we go forward with this project.
Okay. What are other common roadblocks that you've seen besides that one?
The other blocks that I had with other projects, in addition to this one, is supply chain was a big problem for the company as much as everybody else during the kind of COVID and after COVID. So we had to kind of reschedule our work or change our methodology and use something like just-in-time and Kanban system to schedule like only four days or 5 days of kitting and not wait for the components. This way, we can work with what we have and install the items that we don't have or delayed for much later. That adds a little bit more time, but we were able to kind of go around it by timing our work so we don't have to waste too much time. Like, like supply chain, maybe like the lack of certain resources that were not available. So we had to compensate for that by having people work on different shifts so we can compensate for the lack of resources.
Okay.
Do I have to mention multiple roadblocks, or one or two is enough?
Yeah. So this question actually is more of a hypothetical. It was not a behavioral.
Right.
So, and it was a while ago, so I'll just read the question for the audience. So the question was, based on your experience, what are common roadblocks our team would encounter in deployment of a recently launched operating system? So here, I actually don't want I don't want stories, I should say. I don't want stories yet. I want a list of common roadblocks that my team would encounter. Of course, the follow-up question would then be, how would you resolve these and or prevent them, which Mike was already proactively thinking. But it's more important to first give me the list,
List.
right? Because this shows your this shows your breadth of knowledge, which only comes generally with a lot of experience in an industry, right? So, for example, the difference between a good answer and a great answer would be able to give me like 10 different types of roadblocks,
Mm.
right? Because that shows how much you've dealt with in your experience as a engineering manufacturing manager, right? A good answer would give me like 3 and then give me some solutions to fix those 3, right? But if you could start with like, hey, here's like 10 that I've encountered, here are 10 common types, right? Even categories, right? You can categorize them. That shows like you even have the strategic thinking, right? You can categorize the types of roadblocks that typically occur. You've discussed one around like resourcing or logistics, and then your first one was due to, I guess you can call it like technical. It's like a technical roadblock, right? So you could say like, oh, there are different types of technical roadblocks. For example, like engineering teams may not be on the same page, products may not actually work together, blah 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 blah. There's logistical roadblocks such as blah 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 blah, and then there are blah 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 blah, right? And then you could say, if you would like me to discuss ways to prevent these or to handle them as they come up, happy to walk through how I've handled those in the past or how I would handle them hypothetically for Northrop Grumman.
Got it.
But your stories were great, right? Those were all very succinct, strong star answers. Just making sure in this type of question, you want to give me more of that breath first, right? That's how I would know, oh, you're the right manager, because Mike's listed, let's pick a number, 8 different types of roadblocks, which gives me confidence now, right? Because now if I hired you, I can be confident that if any of these 8 roadblocks happen, Mike can handle it, right? Versus you only give me 2 roadblocks. Now what am I thinking?
Yeah.
Well, Mike only knows how to handle 2 roadblocks.
So mention the list first, then
Yep.
talk about 1 or 2 in a little bit more details.
Yep.
Got it.
Just reading what someone put in the chat here. Give me 1 second. Huh. Okay. Let's try that one then. This is a question submitted by Albert.
Okay.
Mike, tell me about a time when you worked on a project and failed.
I that was an example that I had for a job a while back when I was I just became a technical project manager at Thermo Fisher, and I inherited like a couple of engineers. There were 3 engineers working on that project, and one of them was actually the expert in pump design for, like, it's a high pressure pump, and I was able to kind of have these kind of meetings. And from the beginning, he was not collaborating. He was not giving me, or he's not delivering on his commitment. So I had to kind of really try to understand where he's coming from. So I took him out for lunch, and while we are having lunch, I asked him, how can I help you get your tasks completed fast? And to my surprise, he said, why are you the manager and I'm not the manager? He was been there for a long time, and he became irritated that he's not a manager. So I told him, fine, why don't you become a manager and I'll help you succeed. Over the following few weeks, I've been helping him in his tasks and coming up with certain schedules and plans for the work, um, coming up with the plan for every week, giving him the data that he needs to present for the managers, working with other teams to deliver on our commitment, until he came to me and said, you know what, I don't want to do this kind of work. You've been harassing me, so give me back my job and I'll do my job. So after that day, I think he realized that he's not a manager and he doesn't want to be a manager. And it became better by understanding where he was coming from for the type of behavior that he had, but he corrected that by experiencing himself. And I think that kind of made it much easier for me to kind of work with him rather than try to complain to the big boss about him. So I thought working with him, understanding him is better. So while we didn't, actually that was the wrong answer. I'm sorry. Okay. Can I start again? All right. I was working on a project with Mia Saleh, and this was a project for developing a new tool to reduce the time, the what we call the time for cycle time for one of the equipment. So I worked with the engineers to kind of first of all identify where the waste is, the non-value added activities are, and we spent almost like 3 weeks trying to kind of identify those items, including working with the engineers on the floor. And when we could not pinpoint these activities, we had to kind of start a process like A3, which is a process to identify problems. And it turns out that it is actually a process that will take longer and we cannot really reduce it. So while we spend a lot of time trying to find these kind of problems and we spend a lot of time analyzing this data, I was not able to identify these problems. And we just accepted the fact that that's how long it's going to be for that equipment. I'm not sure if I said the right example here.
So what was the failure?
The failure is that we spend a lot of time trying to identify where the problem is, where the waste is, and we ended up accepting whatever we have as a fact of life, and this is what we deliver to the customer. We were
And
supposed
then
to.
what did you learn from that?
Well, I just learned that there are certain things in life that we cannot fix easily, and we have to try. But for that example, we were not able to meet the time reduction that we were asked to do. Not a good answer either, huh?
That's a tricky one. So let's talk about how potentially to answer the question, and then we'll talk about how we can work on modifying the example that you had chose. So if someone asks you, tell me about a time where you did something at work or whatever and you failed. Obviously, it's a tricky question because they want you to admit a time where you failed at work, and this is an interview, right? So obviously, in a regular job, people are going to make mistakes, things are going to happen. But in an interview, you don't want to paint yourself in too much of a negative light. So step one is you have to answer the question, talk about a failure, but you shouldn't talk about one that's super big. So I think that's why Mike chose this example, is because I mean, it was a miss. It was like, yeah, they were trying to like find some waste or some way to improve the process, but they weren't kind of able to. So I think this is a fine example because it doesn't paint you in too much of a negative light, and it was a failure. But next, you also have to end your story, right? Your R, or your result, needs to talk about how you either initially failed and then came back and fixed it, right? Or like found some way to fix the process or become proactive so that this type of mistake or failure doesn't occur again. And then you need to be able to proactively talk about what you learned from that experience and then how you can potentially apply that to Northrop Grumman or whatever. So that's the ideal way to answer the question. Now, how can we kind of use Mike's example and modify that for an interview? So I think the example you chose is fine. You could say the failure was that you were looking for like process inefficiencies, and initially you weren't able to find some.
No.
That's a fine way to start your answer. But
Yeah.
then you got to talk about how later on you were able to actually find those things, right? Because if you admit like, hey, I was trying to find stuff and like, whew, couldn't find it, nothing was wrong, just had to accept it. That's a tough answer to give, right? Because now I'm thinking, okay, well, if I hire you, Mike, and I say something is broken, you may come back and you may say, Corey, I tried, man. I looked at everything and it's just broken. Like we just got to accept it. It's broken. right? Like, ooh,
That's probably not a good answer, especially the closing is needs to be something positive so the interviewer will remember. Usually the interviewer will
yeah,
remember the last
yeah.
thing you say.
So maybe potentially initially you couldn't find a way to solve it or find what was wrong, but maybe someone pointed out something, or you gave it some time, you came back a few months later, or you cut something, and then you were able to create some type of savings, right? Or you were looking for waste and couldn't find it, right? Maybe your story ends with somehow later on you did find something, and then that led to X, Y, and Z or whatever, right? That's one way we could spin it. Or the other way you could spin it is if you weren't actually able to find anything forever, right? We don't want to lie. So then maybe the spin on it is, what is the lesson that we had learned while we were doing all of that analysis, that research, like that problem solving, right? So you don't end it by saying, oh, I couldn't find anything. Instead, you end it by saying, I was tasked to find waste or inefficiencies in the process, et cetera, et cetera. And what I actually discovered was blah, 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 which
Mm.
led me to fix blah, 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 or improve blah, 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 or do something else, right? Maybe you didn't solve that actual problem that you were supposed to. That's fine. But let's not admit that directly in the interview, right? Let's just say that led to me finding blah, 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 right? Maybe it was unrelated, but that's okay. It's better than saying, I didn't find anything to solve that one specific part, right? So I don't know, maybe if there's something else that you discovered that was, unrelated, that maybe could spin that into a good ending.
I think sometimes you have to kind of, even if it's like a lie, but you have to spin it in a positive way. So you show at least some results out of that effort. Spending 3 or 4 weeks or working on something, there has to be some results that you get out of that failure, right?
Mm-hmm. Ideally, yes. Ideally, yes. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Thank you. I think that makes more sense. Yep.
yeah. Okay. Let's go with, all right, let's try this question. We're going to shift back towards the managerial style questions.
Yeah.
Mike, imagine I hired you here at Northrop Grumman, okay? And one of your engineers is underperforming. How would you handle this if you were here?
Well, I have to really understand where that, or why is he not performing? A lot of times, certain engineers or staff will have certain conditions that will, push him not to perform. But in my case, I like to kind of understand why and try to help that engineer or that a person um, recover from these kind of situations. I may have mentioned the case about an engineer who was perceived to be an underperformer, and I helped that person by understanding why he's behaving the way he behaved. So when I discovered that he was a very introvert and he does not uh, provide voluntarily provide his time and his knowledge, I started kind of providing him with the support and the kind of encouragement that he needs. Sometimes even pushing him to kind of spend a little bit more time working with him on the floor, talking to him, talking to other people to kind of help him get to his kind of the right level, and calling him by name to speak up. In one meeting, I had to call him by name to answer a very tough question that nobody else was able to kind of answer. And for the surprise of everybody else in the meeting, he was able to give an answer which was solving a problem with a very complicated kind of assembly on the RF and the RF system for the tool, and he was giving the detailed solution for that RF generator to the surprise of everybody else. And when we implemented that, he was able to kind of solve this kind of problem when everybody else was not even trying. So understanding him, understanding his motivation and why he's not performing or why he was not perceived to be performing, made me gave me that ammunition to reach in and help him to reach the level where everybody else can recognize him and understand that he is very talented, but he just needs the encouragement and the push from someone. And I signed him to work on one strategic project for one of these new work centers. And he was able to kind of provide the right support, and he helped the other engineers in that center. And he was able to kind of deliver on his commitment without even any disappointment to me as his manager or people working with him.
Okay. So I think someone pointed this out in the Zoom chat. Ideally, you don't want to use the same story multiple times in your interviews. It's a very powerful story. I can see why you keep using it. But also, more importantly, this was a hypothetical question, right? And I tried, it's tricky to tell sometimes, but based on how the question is worded, right? So in this case, I said, if you were a manager here at Northrop Grumman
Oh.
and you had someone who was underperforming, how would you handle it?
Hmm.
So what I don't want you to do is to give me an example of a time where you handled an underperformer at a different place. Because we're talking right now about here at Northrop Grumman. So it's fine to say, hey, in the past I had an underperformer and I did this and it worked. That's fine. It can be like a very short part of your answer, but that's only one part of the answer, right? Because we're talking about an imaginary person who doesn't exist, right, at Northrop Grumman, that I'm asking, how would you hypothetically turn them from a low performer into a high performer? So don't walk me through that whole story because that's not someone who's here, right? Like, so you could say, there are first, I am a empathetic servant leader, right? Or whatever leadership style you want to go with, right? You should say first, I am empathetic servant leader, and so I don't always initially assume that someone is an underperformer because they are a bad performer. There could be many different reasons as to why someone may be perceived as an underperformer, right? From my experience as a manager over the last 15 years, some of it could just be due to psychological safety. Some of it could just be due to personality differences. Some of it could just be due to they're a capable engineer, but we've actually put them on the wrong project or the wrong whatever line. And maybe their degree or specialty was in something else, something, you say something engineering related, but we've put them on X, Y, and Z product. So obviously they're going to underperform, right? Because this is not their specialty area. Or maybe I'm inheriting a team from a manager who was just awful and everyone has low morale, right? And they fight with each other. Who knows, right? But there's all these different reasons as to why someone could be an underperformer. So in your answer, you need to talk about how there are all these different potential reasons why someone may be an underperformer. Then you need to go and say, well, for this imaginary person, this is how I would discover what the reason is for their underperforming could be. Then once I've identified that, here are some potential solutions that have historically worked for me. Then you can go to a short example, right? You could say, if, for example, he's underperforming because he just doesn't feel comfortable talking in meetings and people perceive him to be incompetent. I had this issue in the past. All I had to start doing was building up that confidence. So in the past, I would call him out in meetings and ask him to provide solutions. And that worked, right? But that's all you say, right? You don't go through the whole story. You just say, that's one way to fix that, right? Hypothetically, if they're an underperformer because blah, 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 then I would try this, right? So walk me through all those different scenarios, but try to keep it within like a 3 to 5 minute time frame, which is the tricky part. But I think your instincts are correct,
If I can summarize this, so this is a hypothetical situation, and you need to kind of identify why he's underperforming and identify the root causes of his underperforming, and then come up with the remedies or action items how to help him and how to help that person correct these problems. That's how. And if you mention the example, it will be very brief and do not indulge too much into the details for that one.
Exactly. But remember, this is an imaginary person. So you can't just have your answer be that, right? You can't just be like, oh, well, first I'll just figure out why they're underperforming and then I'll just solve it. That's my answer, right? They'll be like, okay, your answer is 5 seconds for my interview question, right? So then it's like, because it's an imaginary person, you don't actually know. So that's why you got to start listing out some stuff, right? Hypothetically, it could be this, it could be this, it could be this. If it's this, I do this. If it's this, I do this. Then that should fill 3 to 5 minutes, right? But exactly as you said,
Got it. Yeah.
Awesome. All right, let's speed run one question. I think I got one more left.
Good.
Yeah. Okay. Tell me about a time you had to learn something very complex in a short period of time.
Let me think about that. When I started working for lab research, I didn't know much about the solar or thin film solar panels. And to work on the capital equipment, I had to kind of know significant amount of background in solar panels to succeed in this position. So the very first I kind of challenged myself is to learn about the thin film technology for solar panels. And the very first kind of thing that I thought about is colleagues and engineers who I'm working with, or other managers and other engineers that I'm working with. And that's how I started from talking to those people. And they guide me to sources of certain information or certain sources that I can find so I can learn more about it. And I had to kind of go and take actually a class with Udemy, and I took a class in there to understand the process and understand the technology behind it. This way, I got up to speed within the first few weeks, and to my surprise, I actually used this information in the very first meeting that I had after the class was completed. And it helped me come up with the right uh, meeting kind of slides. So I used some of this information in my slides, and some of the colleagues were impressed by me knowing that much about the solar panel, and it helped me with the specification that we had to kind of send our suppliers so they can have the design ready for us. So I think between using my own team and my colleagues in the company and taking classes outside, it helped me learn the technology fast enough. I would have been probably maybe I should have done something else, which is kind of working on the floor. Actually, it wasn't on the floor. We didn't have it on the floor on with the customer to kind of learn more about it. But I think what I did worked really well for me, and I'll probably do it the same next time.
And what if there isn't a course you can take? How would you supplement your learning?
Talking to the right people, I guess they can always guide me, especially from within the company. They can guide me to the sources where I can find this information. And that's what I did when I talked to our scientists, engineers, and managers, and they got me to take that class on Udemy. Is there a better way to kind of say that?
Okay, so in terms of the feedback on the question, we'll go quick here.
Huh.
It's a good answer, but it's the answer everybody would give, right?
Oh.
It's, hey, how would you learn stuff? I'd ask people, and then they'd give me some resources. I read the resources. I take a class. Right. So it's fine. It answers the question totally fine. So the way that you can enhance the answer is you should also either be able to break down how you can deconstruct complex topics into simpler topics for yourself, and that's how you can train yourself. And then also a very powerful example would be then therefore if you were to train someone else, that shows mastery of a craft. So if you can talk about a time where you had to then teach somebody on something new that you had learned, that would be a very powerful way to end the story. The other thing you could do as well is sprinkle in little tidbits of super technical information about solar panels that you had learned into your story. So that acts as proof that you actually have learned stuff, right? Because so far I have no way of knowing if you actually knew it or not. All you said was I took some courses and then I put it into the presentation and then it ended up being helpful, right? But what did you put into the presentation? What was some specific technical things you learned in like an hour or two that made a huge difference when you were talking with your customer or supplier? Or what was the spec that you had proposed that you wouldn't have known because you didn't take this course, right? So adding that evidence in there serves as that social proof,
Mm.
right?
Actually, yeah, in my case, I had to kind of learn what they call it SIGs. It's selenium, gallium, whatever that thing is. So I could probably mention a little bit more details about what I learned in that class, and those are the terms that you're telling me to use in these kind of answers, right?
Yeah, exactly. Great. Well, thank you, Mike. A huge round of applause. He did so good. We answered a lot of questions from me, questions from the audience. So thank you everyone for submitting those. And yeah, if anyone wants additional interview tips and tricks, Albert put in both of our YouTube channels into the Zoom chat as well. And we're looking for other volunteers. Thank you so much. Albert, back to you.
Yep, we're always looking for volunteers, so feel free to get in touch with me. Love to have you on. We'll see you in a future week. Thank you, everybody. We'll talk to you soon. Bye.
Thank you, Albert, and thank you, Corey. You've been very helpful. I really appreciate it here.
Thank you. Bye.